Hey, are you still living alone because of your infertility issues? Well, my wife and I just had a lovely baby. I could let you hold the baby if you'd like. Even infertile women have maternal instincts, right? I'm nice enough to let you experience motherhood. The call from my ex-husband was as condescending and prejudiced as ever. He wanted $4,000 for the baby shower gift, saying I should feel lucky to get the feeling of being a mother for that price. See how being married to me had its perks? He made plans without considering my schedule, as always. It had been 3 years since our divorce, mainly because he wanted to marry his mistress. Why would he need to report having a child with his mistress to his ex-wife? I planned to refuse, but his condescending view of me as an infertile woman made me want to prove him wrong just this once. All right then, my husband and kids will come along on that day, I said. Hey, don't put on airs. If you're going to spend money on a pretend family, might as well add that to the gift. I just told him I'd think about it and hung up. On the day of the baby shower, I went to my ex-husband's house with my husband and kids. Seeing my family, my ex quickly became disheartened, confronted with a truth even he didn't know. He was utterly dismayed and took drastic action. I met my husband through a friend's introduction. I had wanted to get married but felt no need to rush things. In this day and age, I was spending my time on work and hobbies instead. Many of my female friends also prioritized hobbies over marriage, not focusing too much on settling down. The shift in my desire to marry came when I was introduced to a doctor, the heir to a medical family. At first, I felt we were too different, but after meeting him, I found him to be very earnest. He was striving hard to take over the hospital his father ran. In fact, he was a sincere doctor at a university hospital, committed to the advancement of medicine and caring for patients. I was moved by his dedication and wanted to be supportive. I respected his efforts and wanted to help him in his life. We were welcomed by his parents and started our married life less than a year after meeting. I chose to be a housewife to support him. He never specifically asked for this, but he appreciated having someone to take care of things at home to help him reach his goals. I even studied nutrition after finishing my courses and finding more free time. We began trying to conceive, but despite our efforts aligning with my fertility schedule, we saw no signs of pregnancy for 2 years. I suggested we get medical advice, but he strongly refused, eventually blaming me for our troubles. Our conversations dwindled, and he began avoiding intimacy on fertile days, coming home later and later. After 6 months, he hardly came home. Claiming overnight shifts, I felt avoided but made efforts not to show it, thinking confronting him would worsen our relationship. No matter how late I stayed up to greet him and kept preparations ready for late-night meals, my efforts were never rewarded. One day, he brought home a young woman he had met 6 months earlier during a nursing student's internship at his hospital. He fell in love at first sight and wooed her. She was still a student, but preferred the prospect of being a future hospital director's wife over a nursing career. He told me, during my internship, I realized nursing wasn't really a profession I could stick with just based on ideals or a sense of mission, so I decided to marry a life-saving doctor and support him instead. The mistress bragged that she was still young enough to try for kids, repeatedly looking down on me because I couldn't get pregnant. She disparaged me as she pleased. My husband and I both wanted children, and it's true that I couldn't conceive, but why should I bear all the blame when we never had thorough medical tests to prove whose issue it was? I couldn't stand being unfairly judged and was furious at the mistress's nerve for brazenly confronting a lawful wife. However, I thought becoming emotional would mean losing. I hadn't done anything wrong. Why should the person cheated on have to suffer in silence? I couldn't respond right there, so I told the mistress to leave promptly, as decisions about our marriage, including divorce, had to be discussed with my husband first. She didn't like my attitude and snapped, "A woman with a barren womb shouldn't talk about being a woman." After the mistress left, we finally voiced our true feelings. I argued that I wanted to try again, but my husband flatly stated he couldn't consider restarting with me. No matter what he said, he saw a future only with his mistress and was adamant about not backing down. I'm not asking for a free divorce. I'll give you the money you want. It's not about money. Can't you think of even a slight chance for us to make it work again?" My husband said reconciliation was absolutely out of the question. He felt no affection for me, couldn't see me as a woman, and said it was impossible even to be friends. He even found me physically repulsive, leaving me no option but to agree to the divorce. He generously paid the agreed amount in one go and quickly went back to her. I wanted to tell his parents about the situation and bid them farewell. His parents had welcomed me into their family, and we had maintained good relations. I felt very sorry that our marriage had ended in divorce. However, my husband seemed displeased with my suggestion. It's all in the past, so I'm just going to say this. Our parents were really disappointed that we didn't have kids. They didn't want you to hear it, but they said they didn't need a wife who couldn't produce an heir. Hearing this from my husband, who had been pretending that his mother was kind to me, was honestly shocking. I had thought we had a good relationship, but it turns out his parents, especially his mother, hadn't welcomed me warmly. After hearing this, I became afraid to meet his parents, filled with anxiety that they might vent their long-held frustrations. Seeing how I felt, my husband suggested it would be safer for each of us to report to our parents separately. "I won't speak ill of you, so leave it to me to talk to my parents," he said. I went along with his suggestion. This divorce made me feel betrayed by everything I believed in, and I fell into depression for a while. I could manage to live, but I withdrew into my home. Calls from his parents came repeatedly, but I didn't answer, not knowing what they might say or if they would blame me for the divorce. It might sound like paranoia, but eventually, the calls from his parents became a source of dread, and I blocked them. Once the calls stopped, I felt slightly relieved, and over time I forgot about blocking his parents. As years passed, with support from people I could trust, my depression lifted, and I was leading a normal life, confident in myself again. Then, out of the blue, my ex-husband called. Since our divorce, I hadn't heard from him at all, and hadn't even bothered to delete his number or block it. During my depressed days, I might have suspected that his parents were using him to get in touch with me, but now, no longer suspicious of others' actions, I answered the call. I thought my ex-husband might have had some urgent matter, but he began boasting proudly about how happy he was since remarrying his mistress after our divorce. It seemed he hadn't called just to flaunt his happiness. While I passively acknowledged his bragging about his bliss, he suddenly demanded a celebratory gift because he had a child with his mistress 3 years after our divorce. With absolutely nothing in common between us anymore, I flatly refused to give any gift. Given your infertility, any celebratory gift from you would just be a waste, wouldn't it? Since you don't have a womb capable of getting that back. It appears my ex-husband still believes the reason we didn't have children was my fault. Even after 3 years, he mocks me as a failure of a woman with a discarded womb. You must be living a lonely life, right? As if a woman who can't have children doesn't deserve happiness. This provoked me, and I impulsively decided to give him gifts anyway, taking my husband and child with me. Your husband and kids must be a pretend family, right? Pathetic woman. It seems my ex-husband believes I must live a miserable life alone. Holding back my desire to retort, I simply told him the date I would come and hung up. My husband and child are not a pretend family. We met when I was a client and he was a lawyer. He greatly helped me during my divorce from my ex-husband. He was present when signing the divorce papers and when my ex-husband paid me. My now husband, still a lawyer, helped manage the division of property and the disposal of the house I had lived in with my ex-husband. Our relationship could have ended there, but we reconnected when I was going through depression and seeing a doctor. I looked so fragile and vacant at the time that he later confessed he couldn't just leave me alone. He started visiting occasionally to check on me and introduce me to a good counselor. Over time, we developed special feelings for each other. Having been betrayed by someone he trusted and nearly falling into depression himself, he was particularly worried about me. Eventually, our relationship flourished, and we remarried a 1.5 years ago. Just recently, I gave birth to our child. When my husband came home, I told him about the ex-husband's demand for a celebratory gift. He gladly agreed to accompany me and joked about sweeping me and our child away if things turned south. His warm gestures made me chuckle. I had been devastated when I divorced my ex-husband, but meeting my current husband showed me that all the detours in life weren't in vain. When the day came, we went to the address given by my ex-husband, which turned out to be a nearly collapsing, shabby house. Luckily, his place was on the first floor, but the stairs to the second floor looked like they could collapse at any moment. The house I had lived in with my ex-husband had a basement and cost several $1,000,000 when purchased. The mistress disliked the ex-wife's house, and it was too large for me to live in alone without any pleasant memories, so I decided to let it go. I heard it sold for a fair price, but I was shocked that within 3 years a person could so drastically downgrade their living situation. However, I've heard of people who spend their money on other things and don't care much about where they live. My ex-husband wasn't that type, but maybe he had just adjusted to a simpler life. I thought and pressed the doorbell. The man who came out bore a vague resemblance to my ex-husband, and the mistress was nowhere in sight. They were both dressed in mismatched clothes that could hardly be called fashion. The hems were frayed, and a foul smell wafted out, making me pinch my nose. My ex-husband looked at me, then at my husband standing next to me, and his face showed surprise. Bringing a lawyer just to deliver a simple celebratory gift? How paranoid can you get? I hate that victim mentality. Come on, hand over the gift. My husband had acted in the interest of his client, but to my ex-husband, he was an unwelcome reminder of that time. Thinking I had hired that lawyer again, I clarified that he was not my lawyer today, but my husband. This briefly changed his expression before he demanded the gift again. Before handing over the gift, I told my ex-husband there was something I needed to say first. He looked annoyed, but after I showed him the envelope for the baby gift, he reluctantly agreed to listen. When the discussion about remarriage came up, I bravely underwent fertility tests. The results showed no issues, and after remarrying my current husband, I quickly got pregnant and gave birth to this child. I showed the baby I was holding to my ex-husband. If I had no fertility issues yet we couldn't conceive, perhaps the baby that your mistress is holding. Could it really be yours? Strangely, my comment made the mistress pale, seemingly recognizing something. My ex-husband quickly noticed the change in his mistress and demanded, "What's going on? Are you hiding something? What was that about sneaking out at night?" Feeling guilty, the mistress became defensive, escalating into a major argument. A neighbor shouted at them for being noisy and filed a complaint, but we decided to leave them to their dispute, thinking they might as well argue as much as they wanted. My husband and I had driven there, so we were walking back to the parking lot. It was a bit of a walk, and during that time, my ex-husband caught up to us. My husband stepped in front of me, ready to protect me and our child, but it was clear that my ex-husband wanted to speak to me. I asked my husband to take the baby and wait in the car. Of course, that was just a pretext. I couldn't say in front of my ex, "Wait in the car because he might harm our child." If my husband heard that, he'd surely suggest just driving away with us. But I had a feeling that escaping from my ex now would lead to more trouble later. From the changed man before me, I sensed an aura of someone with nothing to lose. I felt he might do something even worse if I didn't keep him in check now. I need a favor. I need to borrow some money. He admitted that the baby gift was just a pretext and he had really contacted me because he needed money. Seeing his dilapidated house and shabby clothes, I had suspected it might be about money. Why don't you ask your father first? He's a hospital director. He can surely support his son's family, right? My father-in-law wasn't extravagant, but he wasn't stingy either. I remembered times when he didn't hesitate to spend money when necessary. That won't work. He knows everything. It turned out the mistress had bragged to a training colleague, which sparked rumors at the university hospital where my ex-husband worked. A doctor who was a contemporary of his father asked him what was going on. His father found out everything, including my ex-husband's affair, his pressure on the trainee, and even crossing the line with her. Not to mention that he had pushed for divorce from me wanting to marry his mistress. His parents were furious. They didn't cut him off for having an affair at work, but being married and behaving like that, they finally cut ties with him. Moreover, they canceled the talks of him taking over the hospital and made it clear he would no longer be affiliated with it. My ex-husband was just an ordinary doctor, not someone who had developed a special surgical method or was doing research on rare diseases. He had been sincere with patients before, but after meeting his mistress, his attitude became arrogant. The hospital didn't want to make a fuss as he wasn't worth keeping for his skills alone, so they didn't denounce him. Eventually, the rumors grew and distorted the truth, leaving him feeling uncomfortable. My ex-husband resigned voluntarily and found another job at a different hospital. However, the medical community is connected, and rumors of his affairs followed him, leading to mistakes even beginners wouldn't make. He made a terrible misdiagnosis, resulting in a lawsuit from a patient's guardian. He also overlooked a clearly marked allergy on a chart, causing a temporary cessation of breathing. Another patient sued him after a similarly arrogant examination. The hospital warned him repeatedly after these blunders, but minor mistakes continued, and eventually his colleagues expressed their dissatisfaction. Without reflecting on his actions, he believed others were unfairly ostracizing him, leading him down a path of ruin. After quitting his job as a doctor, my ex-husband has been unable to settle into any other job, constantly switching from one to another. "That's why I don't have any money," he said. Listening to him, it all seemed like a case of getting what he deserved. Why don't you ask your wife to work before asking me? A woman should stay at home. She's a mother, after all. Isn't that obvious? What you just said is problematic. It's a derogatory comment. I might lend you money, but first, pay what you owe. I paid in full. You looked down on me for being infertile, right? In the end, it turns out I had no issues, so I'll be asking for additional compensation for those harmful comments. Luckily, my husband is also a lawyer. Shall we settle this quickly? When I suggested we talk in the car, my ex-husband, realizing what he might be faced with, turned pale and ran off as fast as he could. Talking about money seemed to be an effective way to drive him away. As I got into the car, my husband asked, "Are you okay?" "I said we'd talk it over with a lawyer and he ran away," I replied. My husband told me he had been worried sick, asking me not to go too far next time. I felt deeply loved by my husband, which made me very happy. A smile inadvertently spread across my face, which made my husband worry even more that the scare had gotten to me. After we got home, I shared with my husband the thoughts that had been troubling me for a long time. Since I learned the truth from my ex-husband, I hadn't been able to decide alone, so I wanted to hear my husband's opinion. I had always believed the lies my ex-husband told me and hadn't parted on good terms with his parents. Even after the divorce, I received calls from them, but out of fear, I ended up blocking them. My depression gradually improved after I was freed from the fear of those calls, but learning that it all had been lies from my ex, I only felt regret for what I had done. I couldn't help but think they might be offended by how I had reacted. What do you want to do? Are you okay with having regrets like this? Whether I contact them or not, I feel like I'll regret it either way. If you're going to regret it either way, isn't it better to act and regret that? Doing nothing will leave you with regrets forever. Besides, if his parents didn't forgive your ex for his infidelity, I don't think they'd start speaking ill of you now. Encouraged by my husband, I decided to contact his parents. After several rings, I heard my former mother-in-law's voice. When I introduced myself as her ex-daughter-in-law, she sighed in surprise and then kindly asked, "How are you?" She apologized for my ex-husband's selfish infidelity and for everything concerning the divorce. I also apologized for believing my ex-husband's claims about their true feelings and blocking their calls. I should have talked to you about it. Actually, my son was a child born after unusual infertility treatments back in the day, his mother shared. She had been bad-mouthed by her mother-in-law for not getting pregnant quickly, and her husband had defended her, eventually suggesting they try fertility treatments. Times were different, and she assured me that she never once thought ill of me for not getting pregnant. On the contrary, she was shocked that her son would say such things behind their backs and repeatedly apologized, lamenting how she must have failed in raising him. She also revealed new information. It turned out that the child my ex and his mistress had was not biologically his. Raising a child that's not his own felt disgusting to him. He didn't want to spend his hard-earned money on someone else's child, so it seems they'll be divorcing soon. His parents had let him go, saying he was an adult and should live as he pleases. But my ex had the audacity to ask if he could return to his parents' home. They firmly refused, telling him that after living as he pleased, he should continue to do so on his own. Later, my ex showed up at my husband's law office. He demanded in a condescending tone that his divorce and alimony cases be handled for free. When my husband firmly refused, my ex-husband lost it in the law office, shouting, "Aren't lawyers supposed to defend the weak?" He then caused a huge scene, scattering fire extinguishers around. The police were called, and after they took him into custody for a while, he was released. This incident caused further trouble in his relationship with his mistress. The mistress had been upset about becoming the wife of a hospital director, but now she was the wife of a criminal. Eventually, they ended up going to court, but as they each had to borrow money for legal fees, they fell into a massive debt. Given their jobs, my ex-husband and his mistress likely couldn't borrow from legitimate sources and must have resorted to lenders with high, illegal interest rates. Meanwhile, I'm living happily every day with my husband and child. My husband and I have lively discussions about whether our child should call us Mommy and Daddy or Mom and Dad. Strangely, I'm still in touch with his parents. It feels like they're friends from another generation, and updating them on our child's progress has become the norm. As for what became of my ex-husband and his mistress afterward, no one knows. They might be struggling somewhere, but with my busy daily life, I don't have the time to worry about it. I'm focused on enjoying my child's growth with my husband.